Yo, what's good with you? Back in black with another Enlisted video. If you guys are new to the channel and you love shooting games just like me, make sure you aim for that like button and shoot that subscribe button as well. It'll help you find better teammates and improve your skill-based matchmaking. At least I hope so. Today we're going to be comparing all the BR2 submachine guns for Germany and Italy and Enlisted to see which of them is the best for you in your particular playstyle. Starting out with the FNAB-43, this is a submachine gun of Italian origin with a muzzle brake and compensator built right into the gun, giving it essentially the best recoil in the tier as a standout feature, with a vertical recoil of 24 and a horizontal recoil of 11. However, I am getting a little bit ahead of myself as I haven't even mentioned the damage yet, coming in at a maximum of 5.7, which you'll find at the B par for the course for all the guns we'll talk about today, except for two of them. But anyhow, as another outstanding feature in the opposite direction of good, we have a tier worst rate of fire at 400 rounds per minute, so make sure you take advantage of that near non-existent recoil to not miss any of your shots and severely increase your time to kill. Bullet velocity is locked in at 400 meters per second, which again is going to be a repeated value across the board for most of the weapons we will mention today, but generally speaking, the weapons with the lower rate of fire will be the ones that you will be able to stretch out to further ranges when in combat. Aside from that, we are getting a reload speed of 2.5 seconds, which is tied for third best in the tier, and even at third, 2.5 seconds is still pretty good in my personal opinion. To sweeten the deal, you also get a very handy 40 round magazine, so between the fire rate and how many bullets you will have per reload, it'll take you a while to get through all of that, which can make it feel like you can shoot forever sometimes, which is a really good feeling for a weapon. Great for mowing down squads, particularly when you get the first shot off before they see you. Last thing I did want to mention with this weapon is the shot deviation at 88, which is in 4th place as far as the entire tier is concerned, middle of the pack. I would say every 5 to 10 bullets maybe let off the trigger so you can reset the spread on the weapon, unless somebody is right in your face. But of course, I'd recommend using this gun at medium close range like I do for any other slow firing submachine gun, which I don't think would be a problem for most players considering this weapon has really good iron sights. But overall, this gun has great situational flexibility, mostly outdone by other guns at closer range with a better fire rate. Moving on to the Beretta M1, this was an experimental submachine gun also developed by the Italians, sporting a fire rate clocking in at 500 rounds per minute, which is better than our previous competitor of course, while maintaining that same useful 40 round magazine. We even get a shot deviation that is slightly better at 86, which is third best out of the 8 guns we'll be mentioning today. On the downside, unfortunately, we do get a marginally worse recoil stat at 28 vertical and 12 horizontal, but that's not necessarily too hard to handle considering the fire rate. The last thing I did want to mention about this weapon is the slightly worse reload speed at 2.8 seconds, which won't necessarily hinder you too much, especially if you're reloading before emptying the entire magazine. But like most Beretta weapons, I do consider this one to be a gem, but more so on the underrated side due to not having as much real life notoriety as other submachine guns of World War II. But since I'm doing a lot of comparisons to the FNAB, I will say this gun generally is very serviceable and better than the FNAB at close range for the most part. The iron sights are not as good in my personal opinion, but they are still very usable, even out to medium-ish range. But I will also say that this gun does have some pretty hefty visual recoil, particularly from like a side-to-side wobble, whereas the FNAB, on the other hand, feels like it's not even moving from the kinetic energy that is produced from shooting the weapon. So that is something to keep in mind. If you would just prefer a weapon that basically would make it the easiest for you to hit the target, then I would say, as far as like choosing between which submachine gun you want to use that has 40 rounds in the magazine, the FNAB might be the better one if you prefer a more steady shooting experience. But it is really just dependent on your play style. Coming up third for the day is the big brother to the ever so iconic MP40, which is the much less referenced MP38, which clocks in at a fire rate of 490 rounds per minute, which is almost in line with the previously mentioned M1 Beretta, but ever so slightly slower. You should also know as a downside that this weapon is always going to be 8 bullets shorter on every magazine, because these have 32 bullets per mag. To compensate though, you do get a slightly better reload speed at 2.5 seconds, which like I said earlier in the video is tied for third best in the tier, so nothing to scoff at in that regard as far as getting back in the fight. As far as trying to make a case for itself as to why you should use it over the other BR2 submachine guns, we do get a best in tier shot deviation at 77, which means this gun will give you the tightest cone of bullets when holding down the trigger for extended periods of time. One of the more important stat to consider for submachine guns generally speaking, and for those players who like to hit fire and hose down entire squads at further ranges without, the game making you miss for no reason. Looking at the recoil, we do get a vertical stat of 31 and a horizontal stat of 11, so really the only thing you have to do when you shoot this weapon is you have to pull down slightly on your apparatus of choice. This gun and its protege are always easy to go on good kill streaks with, but we'll talk more about the Apprentice MP40 later in the video. Coming in at fourth and the halfway point of the video, we shall now stop and take a look at the MP3008, which is just a late war development for the Germans copying the Sten SMG from the British, for the simple fact that it was cheaper and easier to produce than the more refined MP40, and aesthetically it surely does look that way if I do say so myself. The fire rate is barely better than the FNAB, coming in at 450 rounds per minute, so do keep your eye on this one if you prefer a slower, more controllable archetype, a submachine gun. Speaking of controllable, we do also have a vertical recoil at 26 and a horizontal recoil stat of 11, so with some slight pulling down on the trigger, the only reason that you're really going to be missing with this SMG is going to be from the second worst in tier shot deviation, coming in at 95, which is a very unfortunate stat to read, kind of a crazy number, but I think it does play into the gun's lore, copying an already cheaply produced metal tube of a weapon, and more than likely having a rushed production as well. So I won't complain too much, I guess, if that's the approach they're trying to take with it. But moving on, much like the actual Sten, you do get that same 32 round box magazine, and I'm not going to say 32 rounds per reload is a bad amount to have, but considering that you will be reloading more often than the 40 round mag, and also considering that the reload speed is slower than average at 2.8 seconds, when you take those two things into account along with that really bad shot deviation, it may serve you as a player to slow down and play more passively than you normally would with any other submachine gun. Also, something else that I did want to point out is that the front post on the iron sight is very obstructive when it comes to aiming with this weapon sometimes, and honestly, just due to this weapon's overall performance, I wouldn't think it would be too far-fetched to say that the developers might consider dropping this one down to BR1, but I will let you guys comment down in the comment section if you agree with that take or not. Coming up for our 5th contestant, we shall now take a look at our friendly Icon and Revenant MP40, and I'm sure veteran players have unlocked this weapon 20 times by now, but for new players, lore-wise, this gun was basically just a lighter version of the MP38 that also shot faster, and that is translated into the game, albeit barely, as we get a fire rate only 10 points higher than the MP38 at 500 rounds per minute, which brings it more in line with the likes of the M1 Beretta, still essentially a chugger of a SMG with a 32 round magazine instead of 40, but not to say that like it's entirely a bad thing. As a nice bonus, we do get a second best in tier reload speed at 2.3 seconds, so you'll blink and be back in the fight with this gun, especially if you reload before shooting your last bullet. Shot deviation on the MP40 isn't nearly as good as the MP38, unfortunately, coming in at 82, but I wouldn't sweat it too much because as a trade-off, we do have the ever so rare boosted recoil control stat coming in at 70% instead of the usual 60%, which basically means this gun is going to become a laser with minimal adjustment effort needed for, or on the player's side, I should say. What little adjustment you will have to make basically boils down to you pulling downward on the stick a little bit or on the mouse, depending on your apparatus, because we have a vertical recoil of 30 and a horizontal recoil stat of 10. It's hard to evaluate how much of a difference it makes in the actual game, but I would also like to mention that the MP40 does have a smidge higher max damage at 5.8 instead of the typical 5.7, so do with that information what you will, because I really can't say what 0.1 does in the grand scheme of things, but it is nice to see a higher number, I guess. And I can actually see the difference in the shot deviation between the MP38 and the MP40, but generally speaking, I'm more encouraged to get closer with the MP40 anyways due to the higher fire rate. So again, it is really just a matter of like your preference and trade-off between the 38 and the 40. Still a really good gun. For contestant number 6, we are now taking a look at the Beretta M1 or the Automatico for any Battlefield 1 players watching. Basically a Villa Perosa M1915 cut in half. This gun is very unique for a few really good and really bad reasons. I suppose I shall start with the things that I actually like about this weapon. This gun has a wonderful rate of fire for close range combat, coming in at 900 rounds per minute, which is tied for second best in the tier. We also get a reload speed of 2.6, which is 4th best in the tier, but still pretty good in my personal opinion, in the grand scheme of things, of course. We even get a vertical recoil stat of 20, which is the best in the tier by a pretty good margin, but that's really where the compliments end, because the horizontal recoil stat goes all the way up to 18, making this gun basically feel like a fire hydrant when you try to full auto. The shot deviation isn't the worst thing in the world, but it's definitely not doing you any favors either, coming in at 89, which means you'll definitely want to be at the closest range possible, because there is very little range stretching to be had here with this weapon, although you can try. This weapon really starts to show its age when you also consider the abysmal 25 round box magazine, and the worst feature on the gun yet is the god awful aim down sight picture, giving you all the inconveniences of a top loaded magazine. And when you couple that with the recoil that might as well be on par with a machine gun, and a smaller magazine that consistently has you reloading every like 2 seconds, and a shot deviation that isn't friendly to hip firing, it just makes this gun more of a hassle to use than it's worth. And after a game or two, don't get me wrong, I did start to get used to it more and more as I kept using it. But again, this is just another one of those guns that if I was a developer, I would highly consider dropping this down into BR1 category, because I honestly rarely see it ever when I'm playing this game, or when I was collecting footage for it for this gameplay anyways. No one really uses this thing, so if you do, feel free to let me know down in the comment section, but I don't think you're doing yourself any favors as a player. I was thinking about it a little bit more, and it's just really ironic because you could really consider the Beretta M38A to be a better weapon than the Beretta M1918, yet this is the one that makes it into the BR2 category. I don't know, they might really need to take a look at that. Coming in at number 7, we gotta take a look at the OVP M1918, which essentially is the cousin of the previous gun that we talked about, developed right after World War I and based on the same Villa Perosa design. With that said, you could assume that the same compliments and criticisms would be levied upon this gun, and you would be correct for the most part, but I do want to tell you how it is slightly different at the very least. The OVP has a slightly worse reload speed at 3 seconds flat, and a shot deviation that is worse by a smidge at 90 in comparison to 89. The recoil is worse overall, coming in at a vertical of 33 and a horizontal of 16, and yes, the horizontal is better by 2, but it's still a bad stat overall in the grand scheme of things. So basically just tugging your gun all over the screen while you try to stay on target. And speaking of staying on target, I will admit with this one I did have a better time aiming, generally speaking, due to the ever so also slightly better sight picture. And when I say slightly better, I do mean slightly better, because it is still generally bad, but I did find it to be more serviceable than the Beretta M1918. And generally speaking, I also found shooting in burst to be pretty effective with these two weapons as well, something I didn't mention with the last gun. But neither here nor there. Just thinking of back to how like Russia has like BR1 submachine guns that also have a similar amount of bullets per magazine, it just makes me wonder why guns like this don't end up being reevaluated and put back into the BR1 category. Because if I'm being real, I don't see how this one made it into BR2 when you're looking at anything aside from the fire rate. But I will let you guys be the judge if you guys even use it or even thought to use it. Last but not least, we gotta take a look at the PPSH obrez again, but this time for the Germans. This one has a slightly different iron sight for some odd reason, and I personally found that the Russians get the more useful one, but that is just a matter of personal preference. For whatever reason, the damage of 4.7, the fire rate of 1000, and the bullet velocity of 450 are literally the same, but for whatever reason, I guess Germany gets a slightly better reload speed at 2.2 seconds instead of 2.4, which makes this gun the best in the entire BR2 category for that matter. But as a trade-off, they do get a slightly worse recoil, going 1 point higher on each category at 25 vertical and 14 horizontal compared to the Russians respectively. But as far as, you know, fast fire rate submachine guns go in the BR2 for the Germans and the Italians, there is literally nothing else that compares to this weapon. It wins hands down when it comes to like close range engagement. So with that fact alone, I can see, I guess, why it was added for them. They were complaining or something like that. But yeah, I mean, just looking at this gun, the stats alone automatically give it top 3 consideration when comparing it to the other 2 fast fire rate submachine guns in this category. So again, do with that information what you will, but I feel like that's a pretty obvious assessment that one could easily make. So there's a lot of submachine guns that we went over today, some that are very similar with minuscule differences and some that are vastly different from the competition. But considering all the stats and the archetypes, I think I have a good idea of my top 3 recommendations for you to spend your silver on as a newer player or free-to-play player. But before that, as an honorable mention, I did want to first shine a spotlight on the Beretta M1. The stats are very comparable to the MP40. But after sitting and thinking on it for a little bit more, I decided that I enjoyed using this weapon and the 40 round magazine that it came with, but it's just something about the iron sights that makes it a little bit harder to use at medium range than the third place contender even. And it kind of has this side to side wobble on the visual recoil as well that I'm just not really a fan of. And not to say that it's a bad gun by any means, and honestly speaking, if you wanted to debate me for why I should swap out any of my top 3 contestants for the Beretta, then I would entertain you and I wouldn't blame you for even making the argument. I just don't honestly in my heart believe that it's better than our third place winner, which is going to be the FNFA B43. If you ask me to choose between the FNFA B43 and the Beretta M1, I honestly think the FNAB is the more versatile of the two despite the lower fire rate than usual. This gun fills this niche almost perfectly when it comes to SMGs that are easy to use at range and that are easiest to control on the recoil front of things. And I feel that due to the gun basically not moving at all when you shoot it, this one should be the easiest for any player or any new player especially to pick up and use. The chef's kiss is the 40 round magazine, which will give you the ability to get lots of kills per reload, and I'm sure with the really good iron sights, hitting targets should be easy for most if not all. Considering the versatility and the accuracy despite the mid fire rate, I figured it could at least go into the third place slot. For my second place medal, I'm going to have to give that one to the PPSH obrez, and like I said, this is a niche weapon, but as I also mentioned earlier in the video, when it comes to high fire rate SMGs in this faction's BR2 range, this one hands down is the best, and it's not even really up for debate. So due to dominating the niche as far as this tier is concerned, I felt it was only appropriate to at least give it some spot in the top 3s, and I felt second place is a pretty good place for it to be, considering every other high fire rate weapon in this tier is pretty trash for the most part. So do with that information what you will, but that is just my personal opinion for that. For a while, choosing first place was pretty hard for me to do, considering that the stats between both of the contenders were so close, but eventually I just came to the conclusion that I could give a shared spot for first place like I did in my previous videos with some of the other rifles. But yeah, for the gold we are getting the MP40 and the MP38 simultaneously. With either of these weapons you are getting either a best in tier shot deviation or a best in tier recoil control stat, depending on what you find to be more important as a player. So I would say if you suck at controlling your recoil, then choose the MP40, and if you're actually pretty good at that, then you can get the better shot deviation with the MP38. The rate of fire is pretty negligible overall, so yeah, since these guns are so versatile, that is why they ended up being in the first place. But at the end of the day, these are my personal opinions. I am hoping with the combination of the gameplay, my explanations, and your own personal preferences, you can choose for yourself which submachine gun you want to spend all your silver on, buying over and over again and upgrading over and over again for your soldiers. If you enjoyed, find anything insightful, or just like the gameplay, don't forget to aim for that like button, shoot that subscribe button as well. Help you find better teammates, improve your skill based matchmaking, and yeah, appreciate you for watching, and black guy out.